Hi there. Gnosticism and spiritual healing. The classical definition of spiritual healing is the creation of a link between healer and healee, such that by some means there occurs spiritual intervention on physical and emotional matters. I suppose you are channeling, as a healer, you're channeling divine healing energy, so-called, and through your intentionality, you are declaring an openness on the part of yourself as healer, and on the part of the healee, to be open to the possibility of miraculous intervention to some degree. And that's certainly, if you look at healing from the point of view of an interventionist good God, or interventionist good healing energy in this world. Of course, there are a lot of healers which are simply thinking of divine energy as an electrical current, which you can transfer from yourself to the healee, and that will loosen the blocks that the healing has, to actually then facilitate healing on that level. But so there's various different paradigms which exist to explain spiritual healing and to explain the modalities associated with spiritual healing. But the point is that whether it's an impersonal or personal divine energy, or intelligent divine energy, or one might say a sort of natural healing force which doesn't have intelligence exactly, but follows the intention of healer and healee. Whatever it is, it's an intervention of some kind, following the paradigm of interventionist mainstream medical practice. And although some people would argue with the word interventionist, and point out that it's not really intervention. It's more like declaring a willingness to be whole or healed on some level. And that brings me on to the fact that spiritual healing, I mean, the word spiritual healing, the phrase, in sort of implies a kind of power, a power to get things done. But of course, the other way of looking at it is it's healing spirit. Now you may say, well, spirit doesn't need healing. The Bhagavad Gita says that the soul is neither harmed nor causes harm. It is soul, and if you say I am soul, then you transcend this world of duality, of harm and causing harm, being victim or perpetrator. And you transcend the whole sorry mess of this world. So where does healing spirit possibly come into this? Well, I suppose it's probably a misnomer to talk about healing the spirit. What you're really doing is healing or the awareness of spirit, and basically by attaining soul awareness through some kind of contemplation or meditation, or what I call introspection, or centering prayer, to use Thomas Keating's phrase. Then you are basically becoming aware of God through soul, or simply aware of God, or the voice of the silence. And this in itself is the supreme healing. This is the most that you're ever going to get, and regardless of what happens on the material world, this is the most important healing. So you're healing your awareness of spirit, or creating a connection which wasn't there before. So you're not really repairing so much as creating. You're not so much preserving, but creating. You're definitely not destroying something, but you are creating. a connection, an awareness of soul or spirit. But on the other hand, I also couldn't, I mean, so you could say that all other healing modalities are not transcendental enough. They don't focus enough on the awareness of soul. I don't know if that's quite true nowadays. I think a lot of healing modalities are more about becoming aware of soul and God than they are about fixing your toothache or cancer, for example. But on the other hand, I then last night came up with this sort of metaphysical model, as it were, and I had this idea that that soul is connected to matter, spirit is connected to matter by means of a sort of conduit, um, which takes the form of a sort of sheath, as it were, around the soul. And very often this does require interventionist healing, as I'll explain in a moment. But to explain this, really, and to explain this central box here, I just want to describe this by analogy. You know, like when you're on a beach, you've got the water line there, and you've got like the soft, soggy sand there, and then you've got the rest of the dry sand there. Well, if you walk across the sandy beach, well, if you walk actually sort of in the water, the first couple of inches of water, you'll notice that your foot makes no imprint on the sand below the water, obviously. And if you're walking along the sandy beach, the hot, dry, sandy beach, your footfall doesn't create an impression on the sand either. But if you walk in a certain area of the beach, where the sand is pretty soggy but not that soggy, you'll notice that you leave footprints on the sand, obviously, where your foot falls. And now you could say that, and talking about causality, you could say that obviously your foot is needed to create the footprint. But in a way, the soggy sand is also needed, or definitely needed, to create the footprint as well. So where the soggy sand, as causal factor number one, meets footfall, which is causal factor number two, you're going to get an impression left of your foot. You're going to, the footprint will be there. Now, in my analogy, the footprint represents obviously where the foot has fallen, and the foot represents, let us say, your physical toothache, and where it lands on the soggy sand, this represents the psychic sheath which exists around the soul, or the psychic conduit which attaches soul to matter, and this receives the imprint of the toothache, and one might say creates the psychic sort of facsimile of the toothache, and because there is a factor, infinite and unknown, which is represented by the soggy sand, which is represented by a sort of a universality. There is a sort of universal toothache, and I'm basing this obviously in Plato's form. So there's a form of toothache which exists in the universe, which sort of is the facsimile of all toothache everywhere, suffered by all creatures that have teeth, and so basically, but there exists a sort of condition of universality which causes the impression of the toothache to be created on the psychic level, which is caused by the actual physical toothache itself. So again, to go back to my analogy, pure analogy, you could say that it's the soggy sand which causes the footprint to be created as much as it is the foot. So there's sort of a two-way causality going on here. And that's important because in a way, if you if you can tackle something about the well, you can't alter. I suppose you can't alter the soggy sand situation, so you can't change the universality of toothache because toothache is part of the finite lower worlds of the demiurge. You see. And you also can't change the physical toothache itself because it has a physical cause. You know, there's a collapse in the tooth, and there's tooth decay, and well, maybe an abscess or something like that. So you can't change the foot, and you can't, in my analogy, you can't change the foot on the beach. You can't change the soggy sand. A footprint is definitely created, and so the footprint, the psychic footprint of the toothache is created as a result of a combination of universal toothache-ness, as it were, and your specific condition of toothache at the time. Now, this you might say, well, you know, I don't really. Who cares about the psychic toothache? You know, get me some nutmeg or get me to the dentist. That's all I care about. Well, that's true. But the problem is, you see, is that the toothache, the psychic toothache, as I might call it, this is actually reinforcing the connection of soul with matter, with spirit, with matter. So there exists a sort of bond between matter and spirit as a result of the impressions that matter makes on the psychic part of soul, as it were. So basically, we are the soul is trapped in matter, and it's sort of chained there or imprisoned there by its connection to matter, which is basically via the impressions that matter makes on the psychic part of soul. So again, you know, the footprint on the soggy sand made by the foot, this actually binds the soggy sand to the foot in one sense. And it's that that may need interventionist healing on the part of a healing agent, and that's where the healer comes in. So I mean, it could be that there are miracles. I mean, you know, it could be that by healing the psychic impression of the toothache, for example, it can actually cure the physical toothache. But that's really not the point. The point is to sort out the problem on the psychic level, which will then loosen or help to loosen the bond between soul, between spirit and matter, and create an instance of liberation. And these instances of liberation, you know, you do this for everything, for all the impressions made by matter on spirit, on soul, through the psychic spirit part of soul. And these instances, every time there's healing occurs on the psychic level, these add up to make it easier to weaken the bond between soul and between spirit and matter, between soul and matter, and also to increase one's chances of becoming soul aware as well, making it easier to meditate, for example. Now, I mean, you're going to say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll meditate, I'll take a whole load of antibiotics and painkillers, and I'll be able to meditate without my toothache, right? Well, yes, but it isn't quite as simple as that, because the impression of your toothache, of the pain and the discomfort, makes on your psychic parts of your soul, which connects you to matter in the first place. This disturbance needs to be addressed. Not because you know, you'll be without pain necessarily, although you might be without toothache, but simply because on another level you won't be able to achieve so much soul awareness, you know, as a result of your physical toothache and the psychic toothache, which is connecting you to the universality of toothache. And I know this sounds a bit complicated, but it's pretty simple, really, because I mean, you know, it means basically that yes, you could be on painkillers and antibiotics when you do your meditation. I'm not sort of saying don't have those things. All I'm saying is that you would need the extra healing to be done on your spirit, or on that part of the spirit that connects you to matter, in order for you to better become soul aware. And ultimately, as the metaphysical model has it, you need to cultivate this psychic healing, in quotation marks, in order to achieve final liberation. Because meditation isn't enough under this model. You need meditation plus the healing of the impression made by physical discomfort and stress and everything, and emotional discomfort for that matter, that reinforces the bond between soul and matter, or spirit and matter, as I've explained. So, and I mention all this really because I am thinking about starting a new channel called the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius. And I've always loved channeling their energy. But of course, some people would say to me, well, as a Gnostic, surely, you know, having healing energies and healing beings and sentient beings and psychic surgeons from Sirius, this isn't really transcendental enough, is it, really? You know, it's nothing to do with soul awareness. It's nothing to do with spirituality, as say. It's a bit lower world kind of preoccupation. And I would answer, well, maybe it is, but also maybe it isn't, because you know, if you need you know, spiritual beings to help you to undo the impressions made by the physical suffering that you may encounter in this world, and the emotional suffering you may encounter, well, you will encounter. That's the idea. You're sort of basically you're changing. You're going into a deep level. So, for example, you know, to go back to analogy of the footfall on the soggy sand and making the footprint. Well, I mean, if you dried out the sand, for example, sufficiently, then that footprint wouldn't be made by the foot, and you can't do anything about the foot, or the intention of the person walking along the sand. But you can do something about the sand itself. So if you apply a healing intervention to the universality of toothache, for example, then you can reduce the impression made of physical toothache on the connection between soul and matter. That's basically the conclusion I'm coming to. And so in that sense, spiritual healing occurs on that sort of level. Now, I mentioned that you can't do anything about the foot. Well, you can't. I mean, for example, say in my analogy, the foot represents pollution, okay? People are going to pollute this planet with something: electromagnetic radiation, microwaves, petrochemicals, chemicals of all different kinds. And this pollution is going to be created. But in a sense, well, you could do something about the pollution, obviously. But at the end, you know, there's got to be political will to do so. And people are making profit, so they don't want to reduce the pollution necessarily. They don't want to accept that they are polluting the environment. So because they're making too much money. For example, the people, the networks for mobile phones, for example, they're making so much money that they they don't want to think about things that might impede their ability to make huge profits, for example. So in a sense, that foot is going to walk across the sand. Okay, let's be realistic about it. But the answer is that you can't. So you can't do very much about the pollution itself. But what you can do is do something about the impression that pollutant is making on at the psychic level on the populace, on people, by basically going to the level of the universality of pollution, for example. And by tackling that on that level, you are, as I say, you are reducing the impression, the psychic impression that the pollution has on that part of spirit that connects us to matter. So that's why I think there is still a place for healing modalities operating on that level, and the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius operate on that level. So they're not so much concerned, or not at all concerned, with physical maladies or physical malaise, or even the effects of physical pollutants on the body, mind, spirit complex. What they're actually concentrating on is reducing the impression, the psychic impression that these pollutants, for example, make on the psyche, on the spirit soul's part of the spirit soul complex, and by working on the universality of pollution itself. So basically, you have like forms. Like in Plato's idea, you have forms, and these forms come before the physical form. But of these forms, they're not perfect by any means, and they need the healing. They need the interventionist healing more than the physical form to which the universal form refers. So you actually have to concentrate on the universal form of pollution, the universal form of toothache, and that's more important, in fact, than the physical toothache itself. Although sometimes there can be miraculous intervention observed by people on the physical level. So that's really the connection between Gnosticism and spiritual healing, because Gnosticism is and should be a very transcendental philosophy or religious paradigm, which has no concern basically for things of matter. Nothing matters to it. But at the same time, spiritual healing does involve intervening on the spiritual level in order to cure some of the effects of living in this physical world, or living in the worlds of the demiurge. But I agree. I would agree with people that I could be splitting hairs here, and in fact, it really boils. It seems that the spiritual healing is quite transcendental enough, really, for all practical purposes, and the cry that spiritual healing is not transcendental enough for Gnosticism may not be something which really, when you think about it, carries much weight. And of course, it probably doesn't carry any weight with you anyway, because a lot of people are into spiritual healing, and they really, really don't give a tinker's ass about how transcendental it is. I'm working on the psychic level, I'm working on the upper etheric level, and I really don't care that it's not transcendental enough, because I'm helping people. I'm being kind. I'm spreading the love. And at the end of the day, love is what matters. Not worrying about whether I'm being transcendental enough. If I'm helping my neighbour, and if I'm being the good Samaritan, then that's all I basically care about. So I'm just saying, well, yes, and I think, but I'm not only pointing out basically that spiritual healing does occur on a level which is transcendent of the physical, at any rate, and Bridges perhaps works on the level of the connection between soul and matter, which actually matters more than you might think. That's really all I'm saying. So I don't know whether I've made everything clear or muddied the water with this presentation. But at any rate, I certainly shall be having lots of fun exploring the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius. Originally, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, he was connecting with the bird beings of Sirius through his music and opera. And it's possible, and I certainly connect with the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius, which may or may not having anything to do with Stockhausen's ideas. But I rather like the psychic. I think they're pretty cute, really. And I like exploring them. And I think exploring the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius is actually one way of being healed by them. I've often thought that, I've often thought that exploring the etheric realms is in fact a form of prayer, a form of offering respect to God. I did, as you know, worry about whether you're offering respect to the transcendental God or the God of this world. But you're certainly offering respect to a power greater than yourself by exploring the astral and the etheric and all these interesting beings like the Psychic Surgeons of Sirius. And I think that's kind of nice to do, really. Anyway, it's a bit of fun, and I'm going to be exploring this in another channel. When I set up this channel, I'll let you know, and this is a sort of connecting video between this channel on Gnosticism, Grail Gnosticism, and the new channel on Psychic Surgeons of Sirius.